to my channel on Ayurveda and Yoga related questions, ideas and talks. I'm so happy that you are back and also that I received a bunch of questions so we can continue these talks now freely. And I'm so interested in everything you come up with because it helps me to improve my knowledge, it helps us to improve the channel, and of course it might also help you with your questions. The questions can be very widely about your own experiences in Ayurveda. If you feel there's something that didn't really work for you, or you want to share an experience what really worked well for you and you want to have an explanation maybe for that, or you have questions that are related to family members, to your pets, to the environment, just be free to always ask anything and I will try to prioritize according to what is useful here. And just please put a like and subscribe so that we can support this channel with a growing audience and with more people who just can receive this transmission of knowledge. So now here we are for the next series, and I'm receiving the first question, please. Oh dear. So one thing I have to admit that I avoid reading the questions before. So this is a very specific question and it is more related to yoga than to Ayurveda. So one thing we have to take in consideration when we talk about prana or prana, that it is not translated as life force or as chi or whatever people think they can put in one box. So prana in the physical sense, particularly coming from Ayurveda, is basically related to the force that makes the heart beat and induces your breathing. So it is much less than what people consider. We have the prana vayu as the seat of prana inside the chest. Then we do have ideas about the prana that is just a part of the cosmic breathing in and out of Lord Vishnu, and that helps us to get the idea how life itself is circulating through living beings, while stones, for instance, and minerals are in a different section where we say there is very little of this prana. But the basic question for me is, when we do ask these questions, are they really improving our knowledge on Ayurveda and yoga? We have to step a bit back here by the idea of requiring knowledge is really doing us a lot of good, opposed to acquiring experiences through dedication, through tapas, through discipline. So what I want to say here is the best way to answer these questions to very specific topics is you move away from the question, which is an intellectual question, and you go back to the experience of prana vayu inside your chest, and you observe your heartbeat rate and how this is altered by your life's experiences and emotions. So when we go into empiric wisdom opposed to pseudoscience or to new age ideas, please always go back to the first idea of whatever you experience in the context might lead you beyond your question, because the question could be also pretty much in the way of your experience. I'm not here to help you to avoid an experience or to fake an experience, but to guide you into the experience. So sit there with your prana vayu, with your gate of prana inside your chest. Here we have the throat vayu, then we have samana vayu as the seat and the opening of your digestion, of your assimilation, of your inward moving vayu, which is a wind. Please don't consider this as a prana itself. And then we have apana vayu, which is the wind that expels things from the body, or in yoga we pull it up. So we have the 5 pranas, but these 5 pranas are also considered as a wind that moves inside you, and that is just like when you're on a ship which is moving through sails and openings and doors and gateways. So it is something that is very vital, and it is very much connected to your ability to understand the inner movement and to create space. So move away from the intellectual understanding and move into the understanding of your body as a field of experiment that gives you space and enhancement by opening up your prana body shrotas, the transport vessels in which prana is moving inside your body, which are generally connected to your ability to breathe freely and to open the space in your lungs, to open the space inside your body where everything of transformation from breathing into metabolic system, into the creation of dhatus or solidified bodily tissues is happening. So I hope you're not too disappointed with this answer, because for me it is super important that we try to move away from too many new age questions and going back to the idea of the very unique experience within a framework that is very tightly knit. So that's basically the answer within the question. There is no substitute for practice. There is just no substitute. So I can't help a student that is not practicing. I can't help myself if I'm not practicing. So the focus on a yoga or an Ayurveda is just practice. And through practice you have a lot of errors where you feel, oh, that was going into the wrong direction. You might experience hurt, you might experience discomfort. But these errors are just important for you to understand that they shouldn't stop you, but they should encourage you to dig a bit deeper into your understanding of the subtleness of experience and not of the gross experience by performing something, by adapting or mimicking or copying certain things. It is always your very own experience and your very own experience of the subtle movement inside yourself and the observation that matters. And therefore, yeah, it happens actually very often that when people ask a particular question, it tells more about the person who is asking that question, coming from a particular point and wanting to also show more of their own understanding. But if you are a dedicated practitioner, then normally you observe the one thing, that when you're practicing, that all the questions are dissolving in the practice and the question stop mattering. Because when we look at our capacities or when we look at our koshas, so we have the physical kosha that is made as the Annamaya kosha, made from food, and then we move forward to the intellectual body, and then we move forward to subtle bodies. So that we say the more we practice, the more we move away from also the intellectual understanding into the deeper and more profound movement that we can observe, which is beyond the question. So I'm sorry, I probably have not been answering the question in the way that you had hoped for it, but just when I look back to my teacher, Shivanarayana Gupta, and I had a lot of questions when I started my Ayurvedic the deeper education with him. And then I said, I don't understand, I don't believe it, I don't know if that works, do you really think that is so? And the only thing he always said was just try. And that also just gave me a lot of trust that he thought I have the capacity to try. Because with some people I wouldn't say just try, because that is just like a free entrance card to nonsense. So when I say to you now, as you are listening as an audience, I said try, I mean just try to get into the subtle way of observing yourself rather than going into the intellectual way of understanding. We have a tradition in yoga coming out from Jiddu Krishnamurti where there's a lot of question. But when we go back to other schools where I'm more dedicated to, then it is more about the practice and the understanding of the connection, which is my key word for my work, so that we say we have to understand the subtle connections within everything that surrounds us as much as also our body is surrounding us. So seeing these connections as more of a framework that is interknitted, then these questions will generally just subside. So go and practice. Oh yes, there are a lot of no-goes. The first no-go is, actually it's written in the Charaka Samhita. It is, don't treat people with half medical knowledge. I think that's a very important point. So we have a lot of people coming to us who have been reading a yoga journal or have been going through a wellness retreat in Sri Lanka, and they come back and they have this half knowledge. And that is often misleading, because the thing is, why we shouldn't do it, is with this half knowledge they have a tendency to interfere because they think they know better. And of course, there's always the responsibility to oneself. I know myself better than anyone else, I think. But if it comes to the trust of a Vaidya, to an Ayurvedic doctor, to somebody who does your Ayurvedic treatment, then I also have to surrender. I have to accept the authority, because there are hindrances in our way of getting well, of improvement, because there's also a part of our mental ability to not properly process information because it suits us well. So very often, even the most dedicated person, I want to change, then sometimes experiences things inside themselves where there's a resistance to fundamental change. And often they do everything outside, like they drink their hot water, they take the medication, blah, blah, blah. But the mental attitude didn't change. And so the half knowledge stops you from really dissolving yourself into the trust of the Vaidya. Of course, the second question is, how do you find a Vaidya that really suits you? But that's not going to discuss here. The second thing in Charaka Samhita is something that sounds harsh, and we had a lot of discussions. Don't treat poor people. So that sounds absolutely horrible and disgusting, and I felt like a big revolt in myself when I read it for the first time, and I was discussing this a lot, and it shaped my work in many ways, because the thing is to understand what that poor means in the context. We always have to see that it's a different language, it comes from a different context. It actually means that don't start treating a patient when their, payment might not be enough to fulfill the treatment. So if I propose a certain treatment to a person and I know that person can't afford that, then I'm also acting outside a moral framework, because I'm actually cheating on the patient and I'm taking advantage of the patient. I should therefore discuss how we possibly can meet the requirements of the treatment besides monetary strains. in the case of my clinic, we started breaking down the treatments to a lot of self-responsibility, because the other thing is I cannot start paying people's treatments. Where do I end myself? So it's a really fine line, and I think you slowly start understanding that this sentence that sounds so horrible now starts making sense, because if I would start paying patients' treatments by overstretching my own abilities, I would lose my clinic. I would lose the place where I live. So that means other people would also lose the chance to get treatment. So is that really then in the sense of what is treatment for everybody? So what we did in my clinic was that people started bringing their towels, they started bringing their own oil, so they could also regulate how much they need. We started filtering the oil. We started just also teaching the patients a lot of techniques that they could apply themselves. So for instance, if somebody experiences extreme sleeplessness, anxiety and stuff, and we would prescribe Shirodhara, which is a classical prescription. Shirodhara in my country ranges around 100 to 120 euro for treatment. And you know, for extreme cases of sleeplessness and anxiety, you would need 10 treatments. So, oh my goodness, this is a whole income. And in Berlin, this is actually 3-month income for some people. How can we possibly do that? So we were looking for solutions within the monetary ability of the patient rather than rejecting them. So people brought their own oil, we filtered it, and then we started teaching them or their partners how to apply this at home, because a lot of the stuff you can do at home. You just have to have your discipline. So it is very often not a question of monetary satisfaction on both sides. It is more often a question of discipline and also of proper teaching. And there are also modifications. For instance, if you don't have somebody who is going to do a little bit of the oleation, how we could teach it, then you can also put a Shiro Basti. You could just also apply the oil in a different way that you can do it yourself. So the thing is, really look at this, that it's a no-go to talk patients into treatments, what we often see in alternative medicine, that they can then not finance in the end. And I think this is really harming the patient, because, and it's harming myself, because when the patient has to interrupt the treatment because they don't have any money, they go out and they say, oh, this treatment didn't work, because they had only 3 treatments instead of 10, right? So this is the deeper understanding of how to deal with strain. The other no-go is, and I like that one, don't treat the naughty patient. Don't treat the patient that is not following your instructions. And this is something that my patients particularly like, and it makes them laugh. When there's a difference between I couldn't follow it because I felt the hindrance in myself and I apologize. I had the Christmas days coming up, or that was my birthday, and I see it that I'm doing it for myself, I'm not doing it for you, but I couldn't follow. And I'm sorry, how can we correct this? And then, you know, we're on the same plane again. But if somebody starts just doing the opposite, that happens not so seldom. Just really doing the opposite. I say, I think at lunchtime you should have a rest, or you should go to bed by 10. There is very little with patients that they were not able to go to bed by 10. And then said, no, I had to continue going to bed by midnight because I had to unwind. I said, yeah, but that's beside the point. You know, we said, just try it, give it a try. And then they just do exactly the opposite what has been told. So one thing is we have to correct them by just making it more about them and understanding that there is something inside them that actually jeopardizes their own hope for improvement. And it becomes a question of authority. And we have to see that in any medical system, authority is very important to overcome the often strenuous and unpleasant experiences of a healing process. Because when you have to let go of habits that you have developed to adapt to your life, to survive the things that happened in your life, and suddenly we slowly just remove these entanglements, there might be moments where you feel very lost or you feel emotionally altered and unpleasant because your compensation mechanisms are taken away and you're facing reality as it is. And we're asking you to face it, but to make sure, that we are also there to make it more comfortable for you. But in order to avoid that, some people are very playful, I would put it this way, very playful in avoiding change by having naughty behavior. So these are the no-goes. Then we also have, of course, things like people with rheumatoid arthritis, that they shouldn't have oleation, but they booked a panchakarma treatment in an expensive spa and they get what is on the board because they paid for it, but it's not the original medical requirement. And there are also no-goes, of course, when the person had sex just directly before the treatment, or they have eaten directly before the treatment, or they have not eaten directly before the treatment, this or that. There are a lot of rules and regulations which are there for the safety of the patient and also for the safety of the practitioner. For instance, people who are under the consumption of drugs or alcohol should not be treated because of our own safety. But nevertheless, basically to say, we are welcoming everybody under any circumstances as long as they are willing to undergo the process of change and healing and connection. Does that answer your question? Oh my God, I love them. Particularly in my clinic in the center of Berlin, I had a lot of people coming from the sex industry in many ways, from the porn industry, also sex workers, escort. And I have to say, the moments of care for themselves was always very intimate. I also had one escort once working for me because she said, she's aging and she doesn't feel so comfortable anymore, so she wanted to learn Ayurvedic treatments. And she left us early because of one thing she said, and I think this leads to the answer of your question. She said, I can't do these Ayurvedic treatments on patients because it's too intimate. And for some of my assistants, like, this is intimate? I think what you're doing is intimate. But sexual encounter, as branded as intimacy, is maybe a wrong word when it comes to working in an industry. But when you come to Ayurveda and you're working on a body with physical sensations, not with sexual pleasure, but with physical sensations, and often with mental and emotional experiences, this can be very intimate because you're taking a lot of time and you're seeing people going through processes, although I avoid like arousals and this and that. I don't like people crying or screaming or having tantrums. That's not how I work, that it has to be like contained through certain techniques. But so when we then started working with people from this industry and they felt this shelter and they felt there's a safe space of reintegrating proper touch, not sexual touch, not intimate touch, but proper touch as something as a home, as integration of an experience of self within that home, not balance, that's a different thing, but reintegrating physical sensations into sensations of comfort and safety and containment. And therefore, I was always extremely happy when I felt that these people were then going home with a feeling of confidence and reintegration and also wholeness. Because what they often said, it's just like as if the skin just got rough and scruffy and is as if there were holes in an armor. And so then also the integration through oiling and subtle breathing was helping to introduce that armor when needed, but also introducing techniques to open that armor when not needed. Because we learn very early to shut down, to protect ourselves, which is not safety, it's protection. But safety includes that we are also able to let go and to open up when it feels safe. People come in all shapes and forms, and they're all welcome. And I know where this question comes from, that also when people start practicing yoga, that they do feel unattractive. But the thing is, we want to make you feel comfortable, and we want to give you an experience of happiness in your body. And if that overweight comes from a place where you wanted to build up also some kind of armor, some kind of distance between the world and yourself, and then a lot of people suddenly feel that they're shedding that overweight on a natural way because they feel more relaxed, they feel safer, they feel comfortable in who they are. And so what we would love you to come is really come as you are and be open to us and be open to changes and the experience of joy and connection, and not through your own ideas who you should be. Because Ayurveda and Yoga, they actually go beyond that. Who should I be? And what should I look like? And should I follow all these instructions? Should I do this and that? And goes more into, through guidance, feeling what is actually good for you, what fits into the accomplishment of having a healthy and a mentally stable life.
What do you think about the concept of balance?
Yes, this is a really hard one for me now, because nowadays there are so many books published on Ayurveda saying this is the way to balance, and we have also things like a balanced life of body, mind and soul, or work-life balance. So the word balance has been flooding into our concepts, and it doesn't really fit there. Because when we go into the classics and when we work, we have to go into the classics. We have no concept of balance. So we always have a concept of building up and destruction. And the moment in between is not balance. The moment in between is atha, is where the things are turning. So when we are working on our breathing, for instance, we are looking at the inhalation and we're looking at the exhalation. There's no point of balance, there's a point of change. So if we focus on balance, we're focusing on trying to have polarizing, and they say energy, I don't use that word, polarizing forces meeting in one point, and then there's balance. But coming from the classics is we are moving from one to the other. So this is a rhythmic and cyclic understanding, which is very different to linear understanding, where two lines come to a point of balance. So when we have pleasant moments in our life and unpleasant moments in our lives, then we think of, no, I have to balance. I have to stay more home, or I have to just give myself a gift to balance the things that are not nice in my life. So I go shopping to balance the strains of my emotional relationship. That's not a very Ayurvedic or yogic understanding, because what we want is transcendence, not balance. What we want is that we are aiming for a moment where these things just actually don't matter, because we are able to look beyond our needs, beyond our expectations, and beyond the things that we are making ourselves a gift or a present in order to balance strains. We have to look into our aspects of duty, but duty doesn't necessarily incline that we have to put up with everything that is around us. So the idea of balance often stops people in the new age understanding of yoga and Ayurveda to make proper and uncomfortable decisions, because they want to maintain in that what they think is an equilibrium, but it is not, because we have to understand in yoga and Ayurveda, also coming from the Bhagavad Gita, that we sometimes have to go into a fight. So when Krishna tells Arjuna, go into the fight, then it is not just, then you come home and balance. It is that you have to align your actions in relation to a higher goal. It is not yourself that needs to be comforted. It is to fulfill the law. That's very different. So it's very strict, and I know for many people it is very uncomfortable to understand that this idea of balance would be a static and not a rhythmic understanding. It is a very Western psychological idea. It is not coming from the tradition, and it's not actually there to propose healing and to propose transcendence. So transcendence in the way that you understand that your own self matters less. So by balance your own self, you actually want to transform it, you want to take a distance to your thoughts, you want to be able to understand and experience a deeper idea of meditation, and meditation is not balance. It is the calming of the vrittis, it is the calming of the virtues of your minds, and that includes all kinds of virtues, good ones, bad ones. It includes everything. It is beyond that polarization. It is going into the calmness and the stillness of your mental actions. And therefore, when we have an arrow and we shoot that arrow, the arrow is about the alignment. It is not about the balance. The balance would be the arrow is stuck. But the moment we have to shoot the arrow, when we want to contemplate, when we want to get into the essence of yogic teaching, then there's no balance. There's absolutely no balance. There is decision, there's commitment, and there's discipline. Yes, that's a very good question, because the Ayurvedic session is basically a mirror, and we can take it like that. So this morning I got up and I looked into the mirror. I'm like, yuck, okay? And then a couple of hours later I looked again into the mirror and put some makeup on. I'm like, okay. And then maybe at night I look again into the mirror. But I still know throughout the day that this is my face. So when we have the Ayurvedic treatment, it gives you an idea of your needs, and it gives you clarity of what you should integrate and what you possibly should drop to make your life better and to re-establish health and to re-establish your happiness. And then suddenly you feel, I should have another treatment, because I start getting a bit off the rails. But for some people, one treatment might be enough. For other people who are lazy, they want to come every day. I don't take them because they're lazy. So they need to get into the discipline themselves. So the amount of treatment is not actually determining the outcome. The amount of self-regulation, self-discipline, and maybe support through friends, spouses, social helpers. That is important, because Ayurveda is always integrating every aspect of your life, of your society, of your surrounding. So sometimes also when we look at the weather outside, so now when we are shooting this, we have about 8 degrees minus. So what is that? Do we need more Ayurvedic treatments? Yes, we should need more Ayurvedic treatments, but if you go out and you have an oleation of the nostril, which is important, and you have an oleation of the forehead, which might be important for your general well-being, but you can't do that in that climate. So now we have to have a break for certain treatments, just naturally by the climate. Sometimes the climate is very hot, it is overheated, we can't do the things that induce sweating because the person's already sweating. So according to the climate, according to the constitution, and according to the ability of the patient, some patients are very weak, so they have to have long breaks between every treatment, and some patients are just having a lot of stuff that needs to be moved, so they go into our retreats like Panchakarma, Purvakarma, Rasayana retreats, where we then have a big pack, like for instance Parkinson patients or multiple sclerosis patients. So we have a big package of people with just anxiety, sadness, or overwhelm, stress, or whatever it is. So then they come for a couple of days and they will stay online with us for a couple of longer weeks even. But there's always the question of discipline and understanding that determines how many treatments you actually need in order to get your position back where you feel, okay, now I can handle and I can see that I'm moving forward. I'm not stuck anymore. That's a very good question. So Ayurveda and the self, that could be like a 10-hour series. We find in Ayurveda not so much the quest for self, but for reactivity or constitution. I don't want to say energy, I just hate it, I can't deal with it. And the real question, who am I, is a yogic question, because we always know, and we know that when we start, that the idea of the self is not identical with the quest in Western thinking, who am I? So in Ayurveda we're trying to understand what are your personal needs according to your body and mental type. It is then often called the self through a function that in Shankya philosophy we call ahamkara, the ego maker, the self-identity. So the self-identity that you're bringing to the table is not necessarily congruent, even it derives from ideas that you have a prakriti, which is the stuff you're born with. This is your matrix, this is you're made of. And then over time you go into the vikriti, that means these things start moving and they attract more of the same. And all this together is then creating something like a sense of self, which is then packed with your mental capacities. So when we look at Ayurveda, and we look at this not as medicine but as a philosophical understanding, then we have to understand that this self is a very fragile thing because it moves with impressions. The self is not something that, in that sense, when it comes to Ayurveda, there's something that is fixed or determined by your constitution, but there's another part when it comes to your mental capacities where we say this is something that is beyond the physical identity or the emotional identity. It is your consciousness that is not changing. The self is embodied, but there is something beyond the self which is identical with all living beings, and this is consciousness. So when we go back to the question, wie war die Frage? So when we go back to the question, changing who I am, so we cannot change our matrix. We can change our behavior, we can change our intellectual capacity to understand, but our consciousness, which actually is our eternal self, that will never be touched. This is what we could say, it is divine, or it is a sacred part of ourselves. And we always say this is the real self, so that's not going to change. We're not going to change anything in you. We're just trying to get the misalignments that hinder you, that stop you from feeling free and feeling connected. These things we try to realign so that this arrow I spoke about earlier can fly sharp and not lose its track all the time. Yes, because there's a misalignment. But of course, just relating to the question before, we all have our chronotypes. We all have certain habits. And the central part of Ayurveda is always the Agni. It's our ability to digest, and that means mental digestion, physical digestion. So when during the day we have been kind of sleepy, and then slowly with the late Agni rising around midday, we start getting clearer because the stuff gets transformed, and then suddenly realize, oh, now I'm hungry, and we eat late. So then we deprive the Agni, and our sleep will be bad, and when we wake up in the morning, the food is still undigested, and we feel a lot of tamas, we feel a lot of kapha in the morning, we feel the heaviness and the cloudiness, and then mostly people are challenged to take a coffee or take a tea in order to spike them up and to continue with their day where they already started exhausted. So from an Ayurvedic point of view, we would then say, okay, try something new, that you get up at 4 in the morning. I know that's always where people say, oh, I really thought about that. Not. So you get up 4 in the morning and you have a breakfast after you had gone to the toilet. And you don't have breakfast before you haven't gone to the toilet. So you have some hot water, wait for going to the toilet, and then you start your day from there, and you go to bed by 10 and your last meal is 4 p.m. I know you're working and it's not possible, but try it. Try it on the weekend and see, maybe there's a change. So when you start going with your circadian rhythm that has been disturbed by artificial light, by late working, then you cannot expect your body to function well. So if you go back to that rhythm, that a lot of patients come to me and say, oh my God, I wake up 3 or 4 in the morning and I can't go back to sleep. And I have a very good Indian friend, and he reframes it. He says, while everybody is asleep, God loves me so much, he wakes me up before all of them, so I have this time to myself. So instead of just unwinding late, starting to just greet the morning with freshness and then go into the day and have an early night, that could be also solving that problem. I myself, I have to be very honest here, no, I don't like being up so early. I just don't like it. I can work very late, I love working late, but I also know, and I wear one of these fitness trackers, I know very well how bad it is and how much it affects my ability to recover. And that's one thing where we say, oh, this is all in the old scriptures and this is nonsense now for nowadays life because our life has moved into the late hours. But then you get one of all these trackers and you see, oops, this old knowledge has been coming from observation, from experience. And we can now verify this experience by wearing one of these fitness trackers and see, wow, actually, even the more we have electric light, the more we have our distractions, the more we put our social life into the later hours, it just doesn't change the rhythm of our body. There's a release of cortisol, there's a release of melatonin, and the release just doesn't care about your desires of lifestyle. It's just working on its own. It has its own rhythm. So coming back to that previous question, we said we have the Prakriti, which is your matrix, and then we have the Vikriti, which gets into the desire of acquiring more of each disturbance, and this all together makes the idea of who you are. That doesn't mean that the disturbance is who you are, but your identification with the disturbance makes you think that this is who you are. And this is very sad, because there's a higher potential that you can reach by regaining cycles and rhythmic understandings opposed to trying to find balance, and by just accepting that when it is cold outside, it is cold outside, it is cold outside. So, or with the Sufi saying, a rose is a rose is a rose. So there are certain things that we have to accept, that we don't have the power to change everything just because we think we have to. That's what I said earlier, that's the surrender to the laws of life. And that's one of the basic quests of Ayurveda. It is understand the laws of life, that you think you can change them, but you actually can't.
Thank you, that's it.
So, thank you very much for all these interesting questions. And I know not all the questions have been answered. And I know that maybe my answers have been raising more questions, as they normally do. So I would be very, very happy to hear your thoughts about what I said, and what you think about, and what your own experiences are, and so that we can meet again very soon with a follow-up. And yeah, so let me know what you think. And have a good day, and thank you very much.